This astonishing building is recognised as a modernist masterpiece and is considered to be one of London's most important post-war buildings. It's one of only a handful of that era to be Grade 1 listed by English Heritage. It was the work of the British architect Sir Denys Lasdun and was completed in 1964.
Sir Denys Lasdun has been called the greatest English architect of the early modern period. He was a pioneering, world-class architect who was best known for the National Theatre on London's South Bank, the University of East Anglia, some of the earliest British tower block flats like Keeling House, Bethnal Green, and the Royal College of Physicians. As a schoolboy, Lasdun read Vers une architecture by Le Corbusier, which remained a strong influence throughout his life. In 1937, Lasdun joined with Wells Coates and Tecton, the progressive architectural group formed by Bertolt Lubotkin.
In 1958, Summery's house was purchased as the RCP's new home. It stood here, a building designed by the architect John Nash in the early 19th century, just like these terraces behind me. It had been badly damaged in wartime bombing, so there was no objection to demolishing it as long as the new building harmonised with the adjoining Nash terraces.
Lasdun established his reputation with a graceful block of duplex flats in St James's Place, facing Green Park, and received the commission for the Royal College of Physicians in 1958.
To us, Denys Lasdun just stood out as uncompromising modern. Nevertheless, a man who we felt would see the history of the college and its functions as something very real, you know. I asked him whether in a modern, with modern building methods and materials, you could build a building with grace and elegance and charm, and he said, yes, you can, and it needn't be all glass. I remember him saying that.
Well, dare I say we regarded him as rather a dangerous young man, I think. But as the time has passed, we've come to see him in quite a different light.
There's this hostility to cities in early modernism, this view that a city is some kind of utterly corrupt and unhealthy that has to be swept away. Lasdun saw the city as something very rich, a place of human lives and culture. If you build a building in a city, you're adding something to the city that is part of it. It's not something that stands on its own.
I don't think we do a piece of a city any good by being timid. I think we've got ourselves dreadfully overloaded by being fearful of the great name. Nash was a good speculative builder with a great panache. But there are many, many ways of handling this situation, and one that I rather like is a way which would be understood, for instance, by painters. Empathy, the coming in of Nash, experienced within the body of a building, for instance, instead of what you look at, what you experience within.
Lasdun's work is extremely admired in Britain and abroad as one of the great bodies of work of late modernism. This is one of his most important buildings, and that's why it has such a high listing. It's Grade 1 listed. Lasdun's buildings don't particularly look like each other. He's always designing to a particular brief for each building, and the particular brief and the particular site and the particular client dictate the architecture to such an extent that whilst he solves them in ways that are related in how he designs, they're not particularly closely related in how they end up looking a lot of the time, unless the functions are fairly similar. So the Royal College of Physicians doesn't really look like any Lasdun building other than itself. It does, however, have certain similarities in the way that Lasdun's thinking about architecture. So firstly, the importance of a long, careful discussion with the client to get a real sense of how the client works and watching the client at work. Lasdun came to a lot of ceremonies and events at the college before he started designing in order to have a sense of what he was designing for.
I looked down on all these white-haired and balding, distinguished heads, and I didn't stay for the end of his speech. I just vanished in a panic because I couldn't see what to do about the building, and one is sometimes very frightened about problems, no point in denying it. There's so little to go on, and I'm afraid, very frightened, and I left the building in a hurry.
The RCP building is admired because it does something very difficult, which is building for a very complex set of needs in a very significant and sensitive context, which it then resolves into something that's very bold and clear and decisive. So it combines a great deal of thoughtfulness and complexity with something that is in the end sort of simple and strong.
But this is actually a very spectacular piece of engineering, the Royal College of Physicians. It doesn't have great arches and complicated curves in it, but if you look at, for example, the library at the front of the building, it stands only on the 3 columns right at the front and then on a wall way back into the building. And between that, it's this most immense span, and particularly at the gallery level, where that's penetrated by the opening for the room, that's very difficult to engineer. So there's a spectacular piece of engineering going on here with lots and lots and lots of steel that runs through the concrete and is specially tightened up before they take the moulds that the concrete was poured into, the formwork, away, in order that it's tight as a guitar string, and when you take the moulds away it doesn't sag at all. At the heart of the building, just behind me here, floating out of the building apparently, is this white cubic volume of the sensors room, which is the institutional core of the building in Lasdun's thinking about it.
My favourite feature of the RCP building is the sensors room. I think it's an extraordinary room, and it's also quite surprising, enigmatic if you like. So when you're looking at the building from the outside, you can see a cube. It's a room that's, you're not quite sure how it fits into the overall building. It seems to float amongst these enormous panes of glass. When you go into the building, you can see that the materials used for the sensors room are continued from the outside to the inside.
The sensors room and the panelling that's recreated within it is an intrinsic part of our history. Panelling has always belonged to the Royal College of Physicians and has moved to 3 different homes during the college's lifetime in London, which is quite exceptional.
When you're designing a building, most of the important material that you'll be producing is 2-dimensional drawings to tell the builders what to do. That isn't the reality of the building, which is 3 dimensions. So designing in 2 dimensions for a 3-dimensional thing produces some difficulties. And one of the things that Lasdun did to get around that increasingly from the 1960s was to use models as part of its design process. Lasdun from the early 60s employed an in-house model maker, which was an exceptional thing to do in a relatively small practice. Out of about 20 people in the building, at the maximum, one of them was a full-time model maker, and that was Philip Wood, who is an extraordinarily skilled model maker.
I worked in the National Theatre team. They were a small team of about 4 or 5 architects. I would make a rough model of his ideas, and he would come in and see what I'd done. Then he'd instruct the small team to do the drawings, because as the design developed, so we designed and changed the models. There is a model which I did of the National Theatre, which was one of the presentation models. We worked late into the night on that one. And Denys joined the model team on those occasions.
In 1960, Lasdun set up his own firm and received significant commissions throughout his career. His massive and uncompromising concrete and glass structures received bitter criticism and today still provoke extremes of opinion. The Prince of Wales famously declared in 2001 that the National Theatre was a clever way of building a nuclear power station in the middle of London without anyone objecting. Lasdun gained equal amounts of critical acclaim. He was knighted in 1976 and was awarded the Royal Institute of British Architects Gold Medal in the following year. On Lasdun's death in 2001, a leading architect of a later generation commented, There's a kind of heroism about his work in big geometrical forms and his radicalism in looking at ways of housing people. Buildings like the Royal College of Physicians were in our textbooks at school, but he's not just an architect of the past. After the postmodern era, he has become a hero again because he never sold out.
The sort of measure of whether this building is really a seminal building is still to come. And by that I mean it's most important to find out what has been the effect of this building on the College of Physicians and the younger generation of physicians who are going to use it. Because the man in the street is still thinking of an architect as a man who styles the outside of a building. But the real architecture today is concerned with the central organization of the problem, plus tomorrow's problem of, you know, what will the building do to the discipline or the life of the people for which it's designed. And most people never connect this idea with an architect. But that's what he has to do.